With pleasure. I grew up in McAllen, Texas for most of my life. It's located in Hidalgo County. Currently, I live in Edinburgh, Texas. It's just north of McAllen, and these cities that make up the lower Rio Grande Valley are pretty much clustered together. So all the cities just pretty much overlap into one another, so we just call it the Valley. And also, I am currently a full-time college student here at the local university, UTRGV, and I'm seeking a bachelor's degree in fine arts. Prior to that, I had joined the military, and I was part of the United States Navy, so I did do a little bit of traveling here and there. I visited California, Virginia, and parts of the U.S. So in my foray and just going out into the wilderness, that's where I would go pretty much in the aspects of camping would be Virginia, North Carolina, and West Virginia. But in terms of my encounter, this happened here within the city limits in terms of that.
Well, thank you for your service.
It was an honor.
It sure sounds to me like you've stayed pretty busy. You've gotten into a lot of things. Wow.
Oh yeah, it was pretty much a good old time, and I really appreciated doing everything I could for my country. And also, it was also just a privilege just to see the U.S. outside of my little town of McAllen.
Yeah, joining the service like that's a good way to do it. Mario, you told me that you suffer a PTSD when you recount your experience. Please tell us about that.
In the form of trauma, I guess you'd call it, because my encounter was, in my viewpoint, was kind of traumatic. I mean, seeing what I'd seen just pretty much shook the very foundations of my core belief systems at that time, and since then have molded them to be more open-minded. But this trauma sometimes seizes me at inopportune moments, usually at night or when I'm in parks or going for runs. It's not apparent, but it's always there, and sometimes I'll have nightmares and I have a hard time sleeping. And if I'm in a room with a window, I absolutely refuse to be in a room that has basically no curtains or any form of not closure, but just a form of anything to cover up the windows. I cannot stand open windows, and sometimes if I am in a room where there isn't any, I get really nervous, and I sometimes relive what I saw that one night, and it can get pretty nerve-wracking, and I pretty much relive it in very, very vivid amount of detail. It's as if I'm just time traveling and I go right back there. It just triggers, and I still feel the fear of that one night. It doesn't haunt me, but it's just a part of me. And when I do relive it, it's like I relive all of that, what's entitled to that package of the encounter, which is the fear.
When the listeners have a chance to hear about the nature of your encounter, they'll understand why you feel the way you do about windows. It's one of those encounters that has that extra creep factor to it.
Oh yeah, creepy wouldn't even begin to define the sensation.
Oh, I'd say so. After you had that encounter, did you launch into a bunch of research trying to figure out what it was that you had seen, or did you just try to put that experience out of your mind altogether?
Well, Vic, I did a little bit of both. After the encounter, I pretty much tried my best to try to rationalize what I'd seen, and it was pretty incredible. So having to rationalize what was incredible was very difficult, because you can't rationalize something you can't explain. So when I finally admitted to myself that there was no proper way to explain what I had seen, I then started to research. I began checking out books on the occult, pretty much anything regarding myths and fantasies. I started looking into the horror section. I pretty much dipped into everything I could possibly get my hands on. Books, magazines. I started watching movies. I started surfing the web. And during my processes of just searching, I discovered that what I had seen was the closest thing to a werewolf you could possibly imagine. And having to dip into that, I just pretty much watched as many werewolf movies as I could possibly find just to see if it resembled anything remotely what I had seen. And I began to research everything, and that's when I discovered what cryptozoology was, and what I had seen was a cryptid, and that the possibility of something existing but not having any scientific proof became all the more real to me. And in my studies, I pretty much learned everything I could. I ate everything up from every state. I researched the Jersey Devil. I researched the Beast of Bray Road. I researched the Lizard Man of Skipore Swamp. I researched everything from sea creatures to flying cryptids, anything that could hint towards what I had seen. And I even came across the Michigan Dogman. And when I came across that, I was under the impression that every state had their own cryptid, and naturally they stayed in their own state. So I discounted it as that, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And the only other thing that seemed relatable to it was the Beast of Bray Road. And when I would research it, I came across another animal in cryptozoology that is in the world history, well, at least in France it is. And the only thing that remotely resembled what I had seen or the encounter reminded me a lot of the Beast of Gévaudan in the province of France. And that's the only thing I could figure out. It was some large wolf-like cryptid, some creature, thing, a beast that I had never seen prior to and had not been reported in my area. And I found it very exhausting and exasperating that something like this is here and no one has come forward. And I understand why, because nobody has come forward, and there was nothing in the lower valley, as reports go, giving it credence. And so a lot of people, I'm assuming from what other people I've come forward to and asked for their stories, were afraid to do because it was something they weren't capable of processing. But in my research, that's what I pretty much did. I drowned myself in everything I could to try to explain what I had seen, and when I couldn't find any answers for it, I just left it alone and didn't really think much of labeling it a dog man. The closest thing to it was a werewolf, but even then, that's a fanciful thing. It's so incredibly ludicrous that a concept of a man becoming a creature of the night could be what I had seen, but that was the closest thing to describing the beast that I had seen in my encounter. And now that people have come forward with Dogman, and I stumbled upon your podcast, it's very relieving to see that I now have a name for it rather than just a wolf man, wolf beast, or werewolf, and I can rightfully say that what I saw was the Dogman.
It goes without saying that it's a bitter pill to swallow when you go from thinking that things like this don't exist to all of a sudden knowing they exist. You're a cerebral guy, to say the least. It doesn't surprise me that you dove headlong into researching the topic the way you did. After putting as much thought into this experience you had as you have over the years, have you gained any ground and gotten to the point where it's okay and you can deal with it in a healthy way?
In terms of that, the only way I can deal with it is just pretty much by exercising it through art. So every few weeks or months, I draw it out. Like, I don't keep any of the actual prints of it because it's just too traumatic for me. But I find it very alleviating and very therapeutic to just draw what I had seen and I always paint it out or draw it out. And often in times, I find it helps, and it even helps when I can get other people in on it. Because sometimes I'll have friends or guests come over and they'll see it, and they'll ask what that is, and then I'll explain what I'd seen. And sometimes they open up and explain that they'd seen something similar to that, or I'm just met with ridicule and shaming, or at least on their end to shame me. But I'm not ashamed of what I'd seen. I'm not ashamed of the feelings I'm feeling. I know what I saw, and I know I'm trying my hardest to cope with it. And sometimes coping with it is all you can do, because that's what the nature of the beast is just learning to live with it. And I'm learning to live with it because the unsettling thing is we've lived with them for quite some time. And the thing with them is that they're all around us, whether if it's a lizard man, a dog man, or any other cryptid, they're here. And the thing is, the reason why we don't look for them is because we don't know where to look, and often people don't even begin to know where to look until they encounter said creature. Like for me, I didn't know the signs were all around me, but after I encountered it, they're there. They're right there, plain as day. It's just you don't know where to look until you've actually experienced it, and everything begins to make sense after.
It is funny how you can miss some pretty obvious things when you don't even look for them in the first place. Having said that, Mario, let's talk about this encounter you had. Please give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Yes. It was in 2001. It was May. May. But leading up to that, I was in 8th grade and had gone pretty much a whole year without any incidents in anything. So towards the end, I was assigned a English project. So I did what I naturally did at that time, which was procrastinate. I procrastinated, and the 18th was the day it was due, which is a Friday. So it's the 17th right now. So at this time, I'm thinking, I can totally do it. I can totally pull an all-nighter and finish it. And during that day, just a few days earlier, we had been starting getting calls from local neighbors in our neighborhood and the two neighborhoods to our left and right that one of our dogs was responsible for killing their animals. And what at that point I didn't realize what was going on because it seemed natural. But at the same time it didn't, because we had a dog. We had two dogs. We had one named Pepsi and one named Flash. Flash was a Chow Chow mix. My dad made him very submissive, so he wouldn't bite anyone. He wouldn't approach anyone in any lethal manner. He would just greet everyone the same, which is he would pretty much wag his tail and then lick said person repeatedly, just allowing that other person to know that they had higher rank than he did. And that's how he greeted children. That's how he greeted other dogs. My dog would get in the fights not because he was challenging other dogs, but because he was annoying the other dogs just by licking their faces. And he was a free-ranging dog. My dad had a habit of having one chained up to protect his garage, because people would go through it, or so he would think. People would go and move his things. They would just move it. And the other one would be free range. I couldn't stand that the other dog was on like just chained to a tree, but it was the nature of growing up with my dad, believing that the dogs were just tools to pretty much protect your home or enjoyment. But I view my dogs as a part of the family. So when Flash was accused of going into other people's yards and killing their cats or making off with puppies, I didn't believe it because he just didn't have it in him. We'd had him for 4 years. There had been no incidents. And around this time, it just started happening. We would get calls that he was last seen in a neighborhood And the following day, they would wake up and find the dogs were all missing, or the dogs were dead, or in some cases that the puppies were partially devoured, or that he was last seen with a certain person's cat and the cat's missing. So naturally, he was the scapegoat. So I was dealing with that, and I didn't really think much of it. I thought it was just hate he was getting. So that was going on in the week leading up to my encounter. Now it's the 17th again, and so I pretty much did everything normally. I didn't take anything out of context. Uh, where I live, it's a pretty rural area, but right behind where we live is a huge pocket of brush. I call it brush because it's a mixture of knee-high to waist-deep grass, and in certain areas it goes up to your chest. And then there's pockets of trees that go all along and go for blocks and blocks. And near where we live, it connects to a cemetery and a canal, and we have canals running all along where we live, and this is where all the pockets of brush can be found. And naturally, I don't think anything of this. I just view it as part of living here in the city. It's just city, neighborhood, pockets of wilderness, whatnot. So I have a habit of leaving my window at this point open. Not open as in, like, unlocked. I mean, not having a single blind or curtain. I felt that I didn't need to hide anything. I didn't need to do anything because my mom and dad were the landlord and lady of our property, and we rented out to several people. So I felt that there was no need for me to hide anything because I'm the son of the landlord and landlady. So I never thought, for an instance, anyone would have the audacity to jump the fence, go to our front yard, walk to where my room is, and spy on me. So I had nothing to hide, so I always had that room light on. So on the night of the 17th, I pretty much waited all the way till 11 p.m. because that's what I was doing. I didn't want to start the project. I fought with myself, but it was due the next day, and if I wanted to pass the 8th grade, I needed to do it. So I got to work on it. In my room, I have a bed, and it's facing the furthest end away from the window. And at the edge of the wall where the window is my desk. On my desk is my computer and my printer, and I have that one at the furthest end. So it's pretty much hugging the corner of the wall. So the window itself is towards the middle of my room. And if you were in my room, you could pretty much sit from there and look out the window and still see the front yard at night because the light happened to be in the middle of the room. So it would give off this great amount of light that would shoot out 6 to 7 feet out into the front yard, and you can see everything clear as day. And I never thought much of anything of that. So that's what I'm doing. I'm sitting on my computer doing my homework assignment. It was an English project again. And I didn't think much of anything. I'm just plowing through, writing my reports, writing my little mini essays. Not much goes through my mind. Look at my clock. It's midnight. Look at it again. Still typing. It's 1. Realizing I have a deadline, I continue to type because it's due the following. Well, at this point, it's already Friday, but it's early morning now. It's going to be due in several hours at 8 a.m. for the English class I have. So I'm typing, trying my best to continue going. And around this time, I decide to take a little mini break, and that's when I notice that it's 3. So I go back typing because I'm like, okay, I need to keep moving on this. So it's 3, and as I continue typing into the hour, I begin to feel different. I begin to feel sick. Sick, not be like the vectors of virus or some kind of infection. No, like just this gut wrenching feeling just took over me, and it was making me sick. Like I felt like I wanted to vomit. And as I was typing, I didn't really think much to connect it with anything because I'm thinking it's just my anxiety because it's due in the morning. And I did find it a little bit weird because I don't usually care for my homework assignments, and I wasn't trying, so I didn't really think that was the issue. But that's what I had told myself it was. It was just the anxiety of the pressure of my project being due in the morning. And I'm continuing to type, and then I noticed that I'm still getting this sensation, this nasty, ugly feeling. It's horrible. It was like something had just crawled into me and made its nest into my stomach. It was as if someone were just squeezing my intestines. It was just that gut wrenching, and I thought to myself, I must be sick, but I'm not sick. I didn't eat anything that would want me to vomit or anything like that. And I began to just try to rationalize it again. It's just nerves. It's nerves. And as I continued to typing, it got worse. I started to get really, really nervous, more nervous than I should. I started to do nervous twitches, which would be like moving my foot really fast, and I started to get the sensation that I was getting that I should just get out of there, just get out. But again, I'm thinking this is just nerves, and I keep doing this to myself. I keep torturing myself this way because I continue to rationalize. Because prior to this, I rationalized everything. I grew up with my mother, and I grew up reading books and dictionaries, and there was always a rational explanation for everything. And so I just did that. I rationalized it, nerves. And I continued to type. And it is at this moment that I began to realize that I was being watched, that whatever I was feeling was an adverse effect of being watched. We've all had that feeling, just someone watching you at the corner of your eye. You feel it, you know. It's subconscious. It's some hereditary genetic trait for when we were just on the savannah. We know we were being watched, and that's what it felt like. But this was on a whole other level. I could not rationalize it at all, and I was being stupid and dumb, thinking it was nerves when it was something more. And when I had that sensation, I once again found myself trying to rationalize it. But when you rationalize something, you find closure in it and you let it go. But that was not happening. This feeling wouldn't leave me. It just stayed, and it festered and it grew. And as I sat there thinking to myself, trying to come up with the reasons what was going on, I at this moment, it's as if my body had just peaked at the crescendo of fear. I could not function anymore. I was literally feeling fear, just sitting there, and I didn't understand what was going on. Why was I scared? I couldn't understand why my body was telling me to get out of there, to run, anything, and it just did not make any sense how it was tied into a term paper or a project. It didn't make any sense. And as I finally just began to sit there, I looked at the window just to tell myself there's no one there. And I see that it's there. I see that it's just the darkness out there. And mind you, I said that earlier, that you can clearly see 6 feet out into the front yard. And I did not even equate to what I just saw at the window was darkness. I just assumed it was night. And I did not even think that there was something there. As I looked at the window, I thought, okay, I should be fine. There's no one there. But it didn't leave. This fear it just got worse. So I got up and walked to the middle of the room, and I looked at the window. And I'm telling myself, okay, there's no one there. And I see myself, because the amount of light was casting out onto my window. I could see a perfect reflection of myself. And so I'm thinking, okay, it's just me. There's no one out there. So I walked closer to it, because it just didn't leave me, this sensation. So I walked closer to it. I still see myself. I'm like, I can't see past the window, because I just see the reflection of me. So I get even closer to it. I still see me. I get really close to it, like my face is right at the window, and I still see my reflection. So I pretty much have to hunch over and look through my window to see past my reflection. And as I do that, my eyes focus. So first I see myself. I see my face. I see my eyes. And I'm like, okay, it's my eyes. I need to see past this. So I see past it, and I still see my eyes. But I noticed that my eyes were my eyes. They were an amber color. I don't have amber color eyes, and it was such a deep amber that it just didn't connect until when I was looking at these eyes. Then I realized that I had already seen my own eyes, and I was looking through my reflection. And it is at that moment when I realized that these weren't my eyes that I registered that the color, this deep amber color, just seemed to turn blood red. It was just red. At that moment, it seemed like time stopped. I honestly don't know how long I literally stood in front of that window, hunched over, trying to gauge what I was seeing. It felt like it was an hour. It could have been just 35 seconds. But as I looked at it, those red eyes, subconsciously, I knew that this was the point. This is why I was frightened. Why everything was telling me to get out of there. And this sensation just went beyond any fear I had ever registered then and since then. As I looked at these eyes, I saw that what was there was pitch black. And in that moment, I thought to myself, it's just my shadow. But then I realized I could see my shadow shouldn't block out most of the light. And as I'm looking around these eyes, I still see the two orchid bushes we have underneath my window that hug the frame. I see the light shooting past me and reflecting on the orchids. I see it on the right side. And then I see that it shoots out to the backyard, and where I'm standing is my shadow blocking the light. But then when I notice the edges of my shadow, I see a darker shape in there, really dark. And that's when I noticed that this dark shape is connected to the red eyes. And as I'm going through this, it feels like years had gone by. I was able to process all of this going on. And I noticed that as I tried to gauge what I was looking, I could not see skin. I could not see a person at all. It was so dark. It was so encompassing that I could not register it as skin. It almost seemed like fur, but I couldn't even see if it was fur, but I know it was not skin. And when my eyes met with it, it was an untold amount of fear that came with it, that still haunts me, that I can't even process sometimes because it's burned into my soul. And sometimes I cannot look at my own reflection at night through a window because it'll trigger. But as I stared at those eyes, I tried to gauge its shape in the darkness, and then I could see it. I thought for a second, the only thing with red eyes is a demon. It's a devil. Because I could look up and I saw these two shapes, and I thought they were horns. And in mind, that fraction of a second, I was thinking I was seeing a demon. But in that moment, I saw them shift and turn. And then I realized they weren't horns, they were ears. And they moved in such a nonchalant way that it seemed to me like it was like a dog, sort of like a dog does when they register sound, and it just shoots its ears and shifts them to register the sound of the direction where the movement's going. And that's what it did, and that's when I realized that those were ears. And when my eyes went back to the eyes, and mind you, I'm still facing it at pretty much a millimeter away. This thing is probably close to the window, but not as close as I can see it. It's probably maybe like 8 inches away from the window, from out the outside. And as I'm trying to gauge everything I'm seeing, it's as if I'm trying to rationalize it too. I'm going through all these things in my mind, that it's a neighbor, that it's somebody playing a prank, that it's a dog on a chair, it's a figment of my imagination, that I slept too late, that I didn't sleep enough, that I'm imagining, I'm delusional, that I'm asleep. I'm doing all these things. And the moment that ended, and the moment the fear took a complete nerve-wracking pitch, was when, as I'm looking at these horrendously blood-red eyes, I see a glint of white. And in my mind, I think, oh, white, his teeth, his smile. But as I quickly look to the source of that white, I noticed their teeth, their sharp teeth, and it almost looked like it was smiling. But I know it wasn't a smile, but in my head it says smile. And it showed its teeth. And I did not, at that very moment, I did not even consider continue looking at it. It was, this is it. This is what was the point. This is the absolute center of what had caused everything. And in that moment, I was seized in complete fear that I screamed and jumped back and pretty much crawled away and hid underneath the desk. I was underneath that desk, seized with an uncontrollable urge to run. I wanted to run to my door, but I knew it was there and it could see me. I wanted to get out of there. I wanted to run to my mom's room, and I couldn't. I was afraid. I was afraid that if it saw me move, that it could go to the back door, take me there, or it would just meet me at my mother's bedroom. So I stayed underneath that desk. I stayed underneath that desk, just balled up. For lack of a better word, I was bawling. I was crying, not because I was sad or anything. This was fear, an intense amount of fear. And everything in my body was telling me to run. It was so instinctual, so primordial that I felt my life was in danger. Now, I'm not ashamed to say that. I could say that I know my life was in danger, even though what I had just seen didn't make any movement. It was looking at me. It had been looking at me for close to 30 minutes. And I did nothing. I just sat there. And it was as if it was just sizing me up. But while I was underneath that desk, I could not figure out what to do. I rationalized it again. I was desperately trying to find reason, desperately trying to hold on to my sanity. I was in shock. I was desperate to figure what I had just seen. I was trying to piece things together, but it just came together as red eyes, pointed ears, teeth. And what was also nerve-wracking at that moment was where my house sits. It's essentially a trailer, but my father mounted it on 3.5 to 4 feet bricks, giving it enough clearance that if any normal person were to walk to my window, you wouldn't even be able to see them from my window. I would only see the top head of their hair. And I couldn't rationalize it. I couldn't give it meaning. I could not do anything to give it weight that what I just seen was a figment of my imagination. I was racked with guilt, sitting underneath that desk, frightened out of my mind, and ashamed of my fear not because of what I had seen, but because I was thinking up the most horrendous things that it probably moved. It went to my mother's room. What if it's in her room right now? What if it's waiting for me there just so I could run to her in open arms? But instead of my mother, it's this thing, this wolf man, this werewolf. And I was frightened. I kept expecting to hear the back door break open, or glass shattering, or the stifled cries of my mother as she's getting murdered by this thing. I was terrified, and as I sat there, I still felt this sensation. I knew it felt like it could pierce through that window, its gaze, to where I was underneath that desk. I know it could see me clearly. And when that rationality went away, Because for a normal person to walk up to that window, you would only see the top of their head. And for me to see a person fully, they would have to sit on the chair out in the front yard for me to see them fully. If a person wanted to stand up on that chair, you would have to get really close to my window, stand up, and I would only see at this point your lower head of the face at the bottom of my window. This thing was at the middle of my window. That means that this thing had a clearance of a good 7 to 8 feet. It was within that range of where it was standing, and I don't even know its full height. For all I know, it could have been medium hunched. I don't know, but that's how high it was for me to see it clearly in my position that night. And when I tried to rationalize it was a neighbor. There was no way no one could do that. There was no way that it could have been a dog. There were no dogs out there. Most of the people had their dogs in their front yards, their backyards, inside, chained up to trees or some fence. And I know it wasn't my dogs because they don't come out at night. They stay in the garage and they stay there. They don't go anywhere. And as I sat underneath that desk, trying to rationalize that it was a person, it didn't hold. It couldn't hold. And I knew it wasn't a dog. I knew it wasn't anything else. But at this point, I couldn't rationalize nothing. The fear stayed with me. I was just there, imagining horrible things, just hoping that my door wouldn't open, that it was just my mom or just anything would not open it. I was not prepared to face it. And as I sat there, I was just consumed with this fear. It was so gut-wrenching, so primordial, so everything. I felt like I understood the fight and flight that we have, that we're given, and I was contained there. I didn't know what to do. And as I sat there dealing with this, eventually the fear and sensation wore off. It was as if it was no longer looking at me, as if my body on a subatomic level, the moral fibers, everything could no longer sense it was looking at me, and it was okay. As everything just died down a bit, I began to calm and I didn't feel anything. I sat there as far as I could go underneath that desk until I finally had the courage to stick my head out underneath the desk. When I did, I looked out the window. Nothing. There was nothing there. And in a foolish moment of just repentance, I just imagined to myself that I had imagined the whole thing, that I did not see it. But I knew it was there. What I had seen was not imaginary, that I did not imagine it, because I had stayed up prior to this as a kid. I would pull all-nighters with my friends. We would play our computer games or console games, or we would stay up just playing cards. At that point, I think it was Pokemon, whatever kids are doing. And never have I rationalized a form of fear and given it shape. Never. And even after that, I've pulled many all-nighters for my procrastination, many times, sometimes all the way into the morning. Never. I never had that sensation. Never have I felt the sense of urgency that I felt that night. And for sure, never for an assignment, for it to generate that amount of fear. And when I sat down on the computer to finish up my project, my homework assignment, I pretty much looked at the time, and I'd probably been there just a good hour, close to 4:15, 4:30, around there. And I elected to tell myself that I didn't see anything, because it was better to lie to myself to finish this homework assignment than to continue mulling over what I had just seen. So I went back to work. I continued to write my papers. I continued to finish everything. I did this, but now, when I did this, I would occasionally look out the window, even though I just told myself I didn't see anything. I had to do it. I did it. And I continued to do this up until I finished my homework assignment. And that was probably like around 6 in the morning. And there wasn't enough light to go out. So I didn't want to go out until there was enough light coverage for me to go. Because even though I was trying to rationalize that what this scene was a figment of my imagination again, I couldn't lie to myself at the same time. So as soon as enough time had gone by and the sun was out, I decided to go outside. To give myself clarity, to give myself closure, to give myself whatever I needed to go on with my little life. Whether it was a lie that I told myself or the truth that I had seen. So I walked up to the front yard. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. We have a good amount of grass covering our front yard, but it really leaves nothing. You could walk up on that grass, a dog, a cat, there would be no prints or anything. You couldn't tell if anybody had been there. I couldn't find anything there. I couldn't find any traces of fur. I couldn't find any trace of footprints from shoes, anything. I couldn't find pins, anything, no scat, no nothing. And as I'm building myself up, I'm thinking, okay, I did imagine it. So I decided to just give myself the complete closure and head to the window where I had been standing a few hours before looking at this thing. So I head to the window, and I don't see anything out of the ordinary. I don't see anything at the bottom of the window. I don't see any marks that a dog had walked up and tried to lean up to be able to see me. Nothing. And as I'm seeing this, I'm slowly accepting this little lie I told myself that I had imagined it. Even though at this point my subconscious was telling me that was complete rubbish. Why would I imagine something of that scale just to put myself in that situation? So underneath my window, a few years prior, my window had an AC unit. So as anyone with AC units knows, that if you have anything underneath that AC unit, it's not going to get a lot of sun coverage, so that area is going to be pretty much dead. So after it was removed a few years ago, it was empty. So that spot underneath my window always had a constant patch of earth. It was just there. It was always firm. It was always hard. That night, it was a bit misty. Not misty as you can see the mist, but it was just wet. It was just a wet night. So if anything had been there, there would have been footprints because the earth was just a bit moist. So it's just enough to leave some kind of print. So as I walk up to it, I notice that the area underneath it is disheveled. It's in pieces. It's as if something had gone there and just started slashing it around. It wasn't an attempt to dig a hole. I've seen what a hole is. I mean, my dogs would do it when it would get hot, and they would do it near the faucet where our hose was because it would leak and collect water, and it'd cool them off. And this wasn't one of those little cooling pits they make for themselves to keep cool in the summer. It was none of that. It was no indication that it was forming into a little den or a hole. It was just blatant claw marks, blatant mess. It was messy. And as I walked up closer to it, I came to a grim realization that what I had seen was in fact what I had seen. And those marks looked like they had to have been done by hands or something with hands. They weren't paw marks. They weren't anything remotely resembling what a dog would do. And the closest thing to it is when you go to the beach and you just start clawing at the sand as it's moist, and you see all these marks and indents. That's what it looked like. It looked like it was blatant, deliberate. And in that moment, when I saw that, I was afraid again. And I had known what I'd seen was real. that I did not imagine it, and that whatever was there had been standing there, and it had either deliberately covered up any tracks that it could have left, or as later in my research in the common animals, maybe have been an indication as a scent marking for it to mark for other animals or of its kind, specifically that this is an area. And I couldn't understand why it would do that. Because at that point, I didn't think it was capable of extreme amounts of intelligence until after I'd seen it and I saw with open eyes that I began to see that it was a deliberate, intelligent creature and is capable of fulfilling designs to suit its needs. It's just mind-boggling. But when I'd finally accepted what I had seen, I wanted to tell somebody so bad, but I didn't know what to do because the bus had just showed up, so I had to quickly go on and grab everything. So that Friday in class, I had to sit with what I had seen, and I was pretty much in shock. I didn't respond to anybody. I looked like I had just survived something. People were just complaining to me about why I looked so disheveled, why I looked so out of it. And I would just tell them that it's because I stayed up the whole night. And usually at that age, at 14, you can pull all-nighters and you would have no problem. You'd look like you'd pretty much got a full night's rest, and nobody would know that you hadn't slept in 4 days because kids have energy. But when I got home, I pretty much mulled the events over and over, repeatedly, again and again. Still trying to find holes in what I had seen, still trying to find maybe a desperate amount of closure, that maybe somehow I missed one detail and it was just a figment of my imagination. And I desperately tried that Friday, but it was the same. And so I wanted to tell somebody about it. So I went to my mother and I told her. I told her about it, and she pretty much blamed it on TV and sugar, like she would blame anything else. You watch too much TV. You watch too much horror movies. And I threw it back in her face because we only had one television, and she controlled the television. And all we watched was soap operas. So I threw that in her face, and I said, no, how can you blame it on TV when I didn't even know what a scary movie was? And so she just equated it to sugar. She said, you imagine it because of sugar. And I scoffed at that idea because I hadn't had any sugar Thursday, the day before. I did not do anything out of the ordinary. I was not coked up on sugar sticks or any form of candy that she was trying to pin on me. And when she pretty much just scoffed at what I had said, I went and told my dad. I told my dad what I had seen. And he pretty much said the same thing, that I was dreaming it. And the thing with my parents is that they wanted me to be a good student. And if I had told them that I stayed up the whole night doing the homework assignment, they would have punished me severely. So I did not mention that I had stayed up the whole night. But even if I did, they would have punished me, and they would have just found another reason to say, oh, you didn't dream it. It's because you didn't sleep that you imagined this. And so my dad didn't believe me. Neither did my mom. So I went to my best friend and his brothers. I pretty much grew up with them, and they're in the neighborhood next to mine. So I went to the back that Friday and went and told them what I had seen. And they laughed at me. They pretty much said I was seeing things and I was crazy. And I didn't know at this point that one of them had had their own encounters, but he had forgotten it. But at this point, I was just the butt of the joke. I was the butt monkey. They made fun of me for it, that I had seen a wolf man, a werewolf. They would not let it sit. So whenever something outrageous or fanciful happened, they would point it out to me and pretty much berate me for it. So that would kind of stop me from ever mentioning it to anyone for a good amount of time, a good 7 years. I made sure I met nobody. uh, like on the street, I would never mention this to them. I didn't want to deal with it again, so I didn't think much of it. Now, while this was going on, um, I had mentioned that my dog Flash was getting penned for all these murders in the form of dog killings, cats, animals. So uh, we were having to deal with that. And as the weeks went by, it was close to June when it had pretty much reached the boiling point for the neighbors on our property. They wanted my dog dead because he had always been seen in the area, and usually in the area that he had been seen the night of. If, like, say, our neighbor 3 houses down, he has 5 cats. So if my dog was in that area, which he would be, he would just be smelling and marking his territory. They would see him there, think nothing much. But the following day, one of the cats would be missing, and then again, and then sometimes it'd be a partially eaten corpse of a cat. And so he would be blamed for it because he was seen the following day. And so everywhere my dog went, usually would mark the end of whatever animal was in that yard or in that household. So naturally, they pinned it on him. He was accused of what pretty much drove it to the boiling point was there was this lady in my friend's neighborhood that had she was a Chihuahua breeder, and she had her pregnant female in the backyard, and she has a wooden fence. So I don't know how my dog got into that backyard. There was no indication of digging or anything like that. But he had been seen in the area. So naturally, when the woman found her prized chihuahuas in pieces in the backyard and the puppies all gone, she blamed him. My dad tried to say it was possums, but we hadn't seen possums in that area for years, so we didn't know if it was true or not, but he was the scapegoat. And so we were forced to put him down. And towards the end of summer, uh, the little rash amount of little animal killing stopped. And while this was going on, once we had to put down our dog, I began to realize, like, what if what's killing the animals is what I'd seen? And I began to just connect little dots. And I began to think that maybe this has been going on for a while, or at least it's it's a hunting pattern to a degree for where how large its domain is, and our little area is just prime real estate from the months of May to July, and then the other months it goes to another area. That's how it detracts from being caught. So we had to get rid of him, and also our dog Pepsi. She was found missing. Not found missing as in like, oh, they found her on the street. No, she was kept chained up. Uh, her chain was torn, and her body wasn't there. So my dad equated to her running away, but she was a family dog. Even when it wasn't her time to be chained up, she would stay in the front yard. She would never leave anything. So uh, in the following weeks after my encounter, when she went missing, in my mind, I knew it was this werewolf, this dog man that did it. I mean, she was prime real estate. She was chained up to a tree. Uh, Whatever it was pulled off the chain and snapped it in the middle of her chain, which was a good sized chain. It was about maybe 15 feet, so it cut it down to at least 8 feet. And we couldn't find any indication of where'd she gone. She never returned. She wouldn't run away. We were her primary food givers. We gave her love. We gave her care. So I began to equate that whatever it was killing our animals, or our pets, I should say. And it was pretty smart about it. And it looked like it was targeting houses that had dogs, and it almost looked like it was just looking for areas where it could just frame other dogs. And while this happened, we had gotten a new dog and another new dog. And this would continue on the following year when the next sighting happened with another group of kids.
I hate to hear about the loss of your dogs like that. That must have been horrible. When you were looking out that window and saw the eyes change from an amberish color to a reddish color, were you changing the angle that you were looking at them and that might be why you noticed a shift in shades like that, or were you static when you saw that change?
Oh no, I had gone to the window and I hunched down, and in order to see clearly, I placed both my hands over my eyes and pressed them against the glass. And I remained that way until I saw the eyes. Now, when I'd seen the eyes, I was still in that posture. I didn't move. I didn't do anything. I stayed that way. The moment they shifted to red was when I removed my hands from my eyes to just look up at what would eventually be the ears and then move down to see the teeth. And I didn't move at all. I wasn't fidgeting. I was just pretty much standing there.
That's really strange. Well, I definitely can't explain that. I know if an animal that's got eyes like that changes its position a little bit, that can change and affect the color of the eye shine. Maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know if maybe it moved a little bit and that's what caused it or not, but that's pretty strange and pretty creepy.
Onto that effect, when it shifted, it did shift, but barely. But that's when the colors did change. It shifted. It was just a small shift.
Yeah, I'll bet you that's why it shifted then, just because it had moved a little bit. But I guess we'll never know for sure on that. You mentioned your neighbor having an experience with a dog man. Please tell us about what happened then.
Yes. In the summer of 2002, we had killings again. It starts up in May, and it continues on into July. And usually it's cats. It happened again, basically. And we had two new dogs. We replaced the one that was taken and the one that was put down. And my dad had gotten a Rottweiler named Shelby, and we had gotten twins, or a set of puppies, blue heelers. But one of my blue heelers didn't make it. She had parvo and passed away. So my younger brother had a blue heeler named Spot. Now he was free roaming, and he was the same way as Flash. At this point, he had been alive for close to 9 months, and he was still a puppy. So while this was going on, things happened again. So wherever our puppy Spot was spotted, killings would occur. And while this was going on, I would go and visit my best friends, basically, in the other neighborhood. And it's the same setup in their neighborhood. It's got like front yards and a bunch of field and a bunch of trees that connects to our backyard and the back of our neighborhood, and then it connects to the field, the brush, and then the cemetery and the canal system that goes for miles. And their encounter was a lot more different than mine because theirs wasn't as, I should say, traumatic, in the form of that they felt life-threatening. It just happened so fast for them. At this point, I had been visiting my friend like pretty much nightly because we'd play tournaments on the games. We'd play Super Smash Brothers on the N64, and so we were just constantly playing that. So I would go over his house and we would play for hours on end to the middle of the night. And he and his family are pretty much night owls. They've been night owls for as long as I can remember. It means that they never sleep during the night when they're supposed to. I think the earliest they would go to sleep on a school night was 5 in the morning. And so their play pretty much concluded just playing outside in the middle hours of the night when most children would not be playing out in the middle hours of the night. So I was there. It was the first week of June at this point, 2002. And I was in his living room and we were playing with his brothers and friends. And what was going on was his younger brother, who at this point had been 10, had a friend over, and they had a routine that they did every night for as long as I can remember. They'd come home from school, play, and then go to their neighbor's house, which is my best friend's neighbors. They had a field in the back of their house, and they had lambs and sheep and all kinds of just animals out there. And in their little fields, they would have grass that went up as far as your chest in certain pockets. And what they love to do is around midnight, every night, they love to play hide and go seek in that backyard slash field. And they would do this. I don't know why anybody would play hide and go seek in the middle of the night every night, but this is what they did. This is what they thought was fun. So that's what they were doing, and they would play with a set of twins that were homeschooled, which was their neighbors, and that's what they would do. So that night they were playing hide and seek. So back to where we were. We were finishing up the game, and then we were just talking when all of a sudden we hear banging on the door because my neighbor's mom always locks her doors, so they couldn't get in. So they're screaming and banging on the door, and we go up and open it, and his little brother comes in. We'll call him Tom. Tom comes in, and he is pale. He is hyperventilating, and he's screaming. And his little buddy was in the same condition. They were crying, and they were hyperventilating, and they were just screaming. And we closed the door, and my friend, my best friend, I'll call Kyle. Kyle goes up to them, and he's like, "What's wrong, Tom? Well, what are you guys doing? What's wrong?" And they were just both talking over each other, and we couldn't understand a single thing. So Kyle told them to shut up, and to calm down, and to tell him what he said. And so Tom, at this moment, he looks at me, and he goes, "Mario, we believe you. We believe you." And I go, "What do you mean?" He's like, "You know all that crap we give you for being crazy, for that crazy animal man you saw the year before? Well, we saw him. We saw him tonight. He's real. We believe you." And at this point, inside, I'm happy. I'm excited that someone had seen it other than me, and that it just helped elevate me to not being crazy. Tom just kept telling me that he'd seen it. And so Kyle wants to hear the full story. He's like, "Okay, tell me the full story." So we sit them down, and they collect themselves. And they basically tell us that they were in the backyard, like they usually are, playing hide and seek. And at this point in time, it's already 2 in the morning. So when they were playing, it was around 1-ish in the morning. And so they're playing in the field, the backyard. And the little girl, it was her turn. So they named her It, and she did what kids normally do when they're playing hide and go seek. She was counting down. So they all hid in their respective spots. Like Tom would hide behind a tree, or his friend would hide in the bush. And the little brother, she would have him hide in places where she could find him. But sometimes he would double cross her and hide in other areas, so that way she doesn't win. So it was like a weird twin thing where she wanted to win, and she would always have a little brother be set up in her favor. But that night, he didn't want to be found easily, so he hid somewhere else further down. So when she finally said, "Ready or not, here I come," she went and she yelled, "I found you!" And so, nothing. Tom was telling me, from his point of view, that's all he heard was nothing. And he heard her go, "I found you, get out!" And then nothing. So then she calls Tom's friend's name, and she's like, "I found you. Get out of here, Barry. I see you. There's no sense in hiding." So at that moment, she keeps yelling at him to get out, and he doesn't. So then Barry comes out and says, "I'm over here." And he's like, "Oh, I found you." And then, look, no. Time out. "I'm over here." "Well, then, I found you, Tom." And then Tom comes out and says, No. I'm over here." So the little girl just goes through the list. She's like, "Well, I found you," to her little brother. And she's like, "I found you. You're the younger twin. I found you. Come out." And he doesn't come out. He comes out from another spot further up, and he walks up to them, and he's like, "I'm over here." And at this very moment, they all realize that there's somebody else playing hide and seek with them. So it almost seemed like it was set up like a horror movie, because at this very moment, all the kids then realized that there was someone else with them. So Tom told me that in that moment, when she said, "Well, if you're all here, then who is that?" and she points, they follow her hand to where she's pointing, and there's this tall patch of grass. And they notice this massive, huddled up mass in the grass, just huddled. Like, it was just there, counting to itself. And at that point, Tom told me that he thought it was somebody else, a grown man, like huddled up in a black jumpsuit. So he didn't think much of it. But that's when they called out on it, that it's like, we found you, that it was not just a man, that it got up, like it. They told me that it looked like a rising shadow, that it just shot up. And at that moment, when they saw it shot up, they didn't want to look at it anymore. It just triggered all of them to run. They all ran. And they all ran off in different directions, Tom heading home, and the twins heading back home. And Tom said when he looked back behind him, he didn't want to look behind him because he was afraid that it was behind him, just chasing him down. But he did anyway. So when he looked, he saw that it was just standing there. And as he continued to look at it while he was running away, he said that it just turned and ran. And he said it ran like he'd never seen a person run in their entire life. He said he was extremely tall. He was 10. So it was for him, it was even bigger than what he thought it was. There was nothing to gauge how tall it was because the grass in that area shifts from being waist high, chest high, to all the way to 5 feet. So they didn't equate the grass size to the creature size. But as he was running away, and the creature was running away, he said it moved so fast and inhuman that it almost looked like it was jumping, like bounding, like it had springs, spring-loaded run to it. And when he saw how fast it run, he just looked forward and decided never to look back again. And that's when they ran up to his house and the whole situation where he was telling us the story and how he was running and screaming came to be.
When those kids were sitting there telling you about what they said they had seen, were you sold on the fact that they were telling the truth? What did you think about their delivery?
At first, when they were telling me that they'd seen it, I thought maybe they had seen it. But the moment that sold me on it was how scared they were. It reminded me of how scared I was. They were crying. They were a mess. They were huddled, and they just wanted to get out of there. And in our neighborhood, there isn't anything in there that is remotely humanoid that comes in there. I mean, the largest animal here that would be a predator would be an ocelot, and that's just down by the rivers. And other than that, there's nothing but cattle and dogs and sheep. And he told me that he knew it wasn't a man because the first thing he told me that came to mind was, oh, we have a black man hiding in the field. But when he said that when it rose up, he noticed that it wasn't a man because he said it wasn't wearing clothes and it wasn't skin. Therefore, it wasn't a black man because it was a black thing he saw. It was black, pitch black, they said. That it was so hard to see it because there wasn't a moon out. But they could tell that whatever it was darker than the night itself. That the closest thing to anything was fur that they had seen. And they didn't want to memorize anything more of it because in their minds, that was all they needed to see to get out of there. And that's what they did. And so when he was retelling me this, I questioned him. Okay, well, I asked him, did it have red eyes? Did it have amber eyes? Did it see ears? And he told me that, honestly, Mario, we didn't want to look at its face because we were afraid of what we would see in its face. And that's why they all took off running. And I'd known him at this point for like 4 years. And I've known him since then. And never have we had an encounter like that with him because he was pretty much brought up with his older brothers. And so his older brothers were pretty tough. They were thick-skinned, tough. Nothing scared them. So he came up in that same attitude. And he would pick fights and stuff. And so he was a tough little kid for somebody his age. And he acted more mature in the age of he was already a high schooler trapped in a 10-year-old kid's head, basically. And when I continued to question about the size, the height, what he could see about it, he wouldn't divulge anything, but the same was with his friend. He said the same thing, and they did not want to go out at night anymore. And the only thing he said that wrong with what I said was when he said we saw what you saw. Basically, he said the moment he saw that it was pitch black, he remembered my story and finally believed me, basically. And in my mind, and from his reactions and what he was telling me, I knew he was telling me the truth. And I was not like his older brothers making fun of him right there. I told him, I was like, I believe you. I believe you. And he was happy about it, but at the same time, they were extremely scared. And the fact that 4 kids had seen it was further proof, because these kids played out every night for months, and they've never been scared, or at the moment had any reason to be scared. Reason being that that neighborhood was something they knew. It was known to them. There wasn't anything in my neighborhood that I didn't know, and there wasn't anything in their neighborhood that they didn't know. So it was so alien to them, so incredible, that I knew that they weren't making anything up, because if he did lie, it would be an easy catch to catch him in a lie. He would be calm. He wouldn't be completely whacked with terror like how I was, and all I did was saw myself in him when him and his friend were like that. So I gave him a full vote of confidence in that, and he was so believable in his story that my best friend, and his older brother believed him too, because it was very convincing. And they measured the amount of fear and intensity in his face and his friend's face, that they knew what he had seen was what he had seen, and they didn't doubt him. Now, mind you that at this point now it's like close to 3 in the morning, and I realized I still had a last week of school left, and it was a school night. And what was horrifying for me was I had finally found somebody that could validate what I had seen, and there was more than 2 witnesses. They had 4. But the fact that it was there that night meant that I had to go home walking alone in that neighborhood and cross through my other neighborhood just to get home. That was like the second closest nerve-wracking moment of my life. And I remember the sensation of, after they told me that, I had asked permission, may I stay the night? And they pretty much flat out told me no. And at this point, everyone already knows that it was out there, and it was a funny joke to them to send me home by myself. When I opened the back door to his backyard, because his backyard has grass that grows up to your neck, I was imagining horrible things, and the grass is waiting for me. And he has dogs too. He has 2 dogs, and I was beginning to equate a relationship with dogs and this dog man. That the dogs were peaceful, so I noticed it wasn't in the area, but I realized that whenever I was at my friend's house, there were certain nights when the dogs would overreact to an ungodly amount. Like, it was as if they were all being possessed, more so than when an alarm goes off or another dog goes by. It was a different type of sensation these dogs would give off when they were reacting to something. It wasn't an intruder. It wasn't another dog. They would go crazy. So in my mind, I would equate that to the dog man. And I would notice a pattern on our property too, that there would be nights where all the dogs would freak out. So when I made the journey home, I did not see the dogs overreact or anything. They looked docile and calm. So in my mind, I told myself, I have to get the heck home. So I ran the fastest I could possibly ran, and I made sure never to look behind me, because if it's true what he'd seen, that it could clear distance faster than he could make, then that thing could easily catch me in the dark running home. And I ran as fast as I possibly could, and I never felt so relieved to make it home that one morning.
You said that the kids purposefully didn't gather all that many details. They just wanted to get out of there. But if it had a muzzle, that'd be pretty hard to ignore. Did any of the kids ever mention seeing that it had a muzzle?
No, every time I brought it up after that their encounter with it, they all pretty much agreed that the moment they saw it stand taller than the grass around them and loom over them, that they didn't even want to wait to let their eyes trail up to its face, because in their mind, what they'd seen was something that they shouldn't have been seeing, and the fear of seeing its face with teeth was something more horrendous that they could possibly cope with at that age. So that's why all of them took off. And when I repeatedly questioned, they told me that they did not want to look at the face, because what Tom would do was he also told my story to them. So in relaying it to them, they also knew what they had seen was what I had seen, but they did not want to see the face. They did not want to see the eyes I had been talking about, because in their minds they'd finally found or encountered what I had encountered, and they didn't want to deal with seeing its eyes. So none of them even remotely went past the chest region of this creature.
I'm so glad those kids did it that way. Yeah, they don't need to know what the eyes look like. I'm so glad they just got out of there and never will know. Moving back to your Dogman, though, what werewolf in movies most closely approximates what the Dogman you saw that night looks like?
Well, the closest indicator to what I had seen that one night, because I had seen a lot. It had big ears, so the ears from the werewolves from the Underworld movies wasn't close enough, and maybe the second movie, but the snout was too long on that one. The closest I could pretty much label it in terms of cinematic werewolves would have to be it would have to be the Van Helsing werewolves. The Van Helsing werewolves have this extreme build to them, but the face is so streamlined that that's the closest in ear length and face length that I could measure from what I had seen. And even though the director of that movie had them designed to look like rock stars, like he says in an audio commentary, what I had seen was not a rock star.
You were telling me about someone else who had seen a Dogman. In fact, this Dogman chased him in his truck. What can you tell us about what happened to him?
That one was my former roommate. What I did after I came back here to Texas, I tried to collect more stories, and so I started to open up to people. And so I would casually mention what I had seen, or sometimes I would paint a picture of the Dogman from the window, and they would ask about it, and that's how I would initiate a conversation. Because if I showed them that it was acceptable, that it was okay, the people who had seen something would be more inclined to share. So when I spoke to him, he said I had something similar to that. My roommate at that time was 21. At that point, he was a Christian, but when he had the encounter, he wasn't. He was what he called very worldly. He says that he and a bunch of his friends from his neighborhood, when they were around 16, one of them had a permit, so they loved to drive around in the boonies out here. The boonies here are pretty much patches of forest and trees and a bunch of fields and just patches of wilderness here and there. And the only thing that most kids do at that age is just drive around at night, because it's the only form of freedom you get from your parents. So he was telling me in his encounter that he and his buddies went out driving out there. It was around here in Edinburgh. We have a lot of streets that go out into the middle of nowhere, and then it just leads you to just wilderness. And they were driving out there just joyriding, basically. And he tells me that on one occasion they were just driving, and they were going, minding their own business, when at the side of the road they'd notice a dog laying down, and they had thought it had been hit. But the reason why they were thinking it was a dog was from where it was at. It looked like it was small because of depth perception. But as they got closer to it, they said that it was getting bigger and bigger. And they thought it was a St. Bernard, but it was a black St. Bernard. They didn't know what it was at first. They thought it was a big dog, a bear, but we don't have bears down here. So as they're slowly driving up to it, once they get close enough to it, they notice that it gets up on all fours, and it was bigger than what they could have anticipated. The moment they saw it get up, the driver just put the gas. He told me that the driver's friend, he just said he had to get out of there. Seeing it get up, he thought it was getting up from the dead. That's why he put the pedal to the metal, because he thought it was an undead dog. And then his buddies were looking back at it, and that's when they said that it started chasing them. And at first it was running on all fours, and then it got up and started bipedally running after them. And it looked like it was faster running on two legs. And at this moment, all of his friends had to look back at the rear mirror, and with the reflection from the tailgate lights, they could see it was a big, all black, wolfish-looking thing. And the moment they'd seen the eye shine to it, they just completely lost it. And they told their buddy to drive faster. And he didn't see it. He was just trying to drive. So he just started going faster and faster, and they were pretty much pressuring him to go faster. And he said that they were clearing 45, and it was still going after them. And it wasn't until they hit 50 to 60 that it was getting farther and farther away from their sight, from where they were looking at it, and eventually it was gone. And he told me that after seeing that, he didn't know what it was, but he called it a devil dog, and he thought it was sent by the devil, and that's why he should convert. And so the fear from having seen that pushed them in the arms of Christianity, and that's how he owes his faith to that encounter.
Well, that's a night he's never going to forget. I can't even imagine what that must have been like.
It was enough to pretty much reaffirm his faith, though.
Oh, I can understand that. As far as you dealing with your encounter would go, though, do you wish you would have done anything differently in hopes that maybe it would have helped you get over the trauma of that encounter you had sooner and more easily?
For me, I tried that, but it still didn't alleviate it, because although his encounter was more nerve-wracking, it was a bit more detached because he was with his friends, and I was alone. And I did pursue faith to try to help, but it still wasn't enough to help me deal with it. Yeah, I can go to church, I can pray about it, but it's still there. For me, it haunts me because I was so close to it. If that thing wanted to, it could have punched through that window and taken me, and my mom wouldn't have even known. The dogs wouldn't have done anything because they were in the garage. Nobody would have known, and I could have been written off as a runaway, as far as anyone knows, if these things are intelligent. And for my old roommate, for him to encounter it that way, I believe it was more graceful for him because it was more manageable in his experience, because he was in a car, it was moving, and although it did give chase, it was still detached from him. It wasn't within his confines of space.
Like you mentioned just a bit ago, the fact that you were all alone, that just made it that much harder for you to deal with. Well, it's about time for us to get out of here, Mario. Do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Yes. With my experiences and having had my eyes open, all I can say to the fellow listeners out there who have had similar encounters or are too afraid to speak or who haven't had them, all I can say is just be mindful of your surroundings, be it a forest, a field, or at home. Just because you can't see something there doesn't mean it's not there.
That's very well said. Well, thanks again so much for coming on the show tonight, Mario. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was an honor.
Oh, it's great having you here. Have yourself a great night, okay?
Okay, you too.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.